When I was doing history videos a couple years ago, where I was doing season by season, Boston and Montreal, bad matchup for Boston. And in this video, I'm just going to look at the series between these teams from 1984 through until now. They've met a lot. This is why when I see people complaining about, I don't want to see the same series all the time, you got to go back to 1 versus 8. 1 versus 8 still gives you the same teams against each other often enough. And so these teams met each other a lot, always in round 1 or round 2. Never any further than that because they've been in the same division because they hate each other. And the NHL realizes hate is good. So in terms of matchups, going back to 1984, and this is, of course, before I was a fan of the Boston Bruins. This is prior to that. The Boston Bruins had a really good season. They had home ice advantage, and they lost. And Montreal swept them. 3 games. So it was best of 5 at that stage. And 2-1, 3-1, and 5-0 were the scores. As Steve Penney became a hero overnight to Montreal, and Pete Peters took a great season he had in 1984, and it didn't matter. He was out in 3. The Bruins were out in 3. They get outscored 10-2. And this is kind of how history between these teams had worked. Their overall record, Montreal has won 106 games in the playoffs against Boston, 71 wins for Boston, and that includes the fact that in recent times things seem to have evened up. But there's something behind that too. So, 1985, they meet again. First round again. Montreal has home ice this time. They win it in 5. They lose game 1, 5-3. They win game 2, 5-3. They win game 3, 5-2. They lose game 4, 7-6. Most 80s game these teams have played. And then they win 1-0 in game 5. It's Penny, again in net for Montreal. And Doug Keens and Pete Peters split the net for Boston. So that's an issue. Keens ends up being 2-2 in that series. Peters 0-1. 1986, they meet again. Montreal has home ice again. Montreal sweeps them again. So it's a 3-game sweep. Round 1 again. So round 1, Montreal and Boston. Montreal wins. This is their 3rd in a row. By scores of 3-1, 3-2, and 4-3. So they only allow 5 goals against Boston in 3 games. It's Patrick Roy against Bill Ranford and Pat Riggin. So before Bill Ranford became a Stanley Cup champion in 1990, he was a goaltender for Boston that it just wasn't working. So 1987 rolls around. Montreal meets Boston in round 1 again and sweeps them in round 1, even though round 1 is now a best of 7 affair. So they win 4 in a row. So Montreal went to the NHL and said, hey, can we beat Boston 4 times in round 1 this year? We're kind of getting bored, and those 3 games aren't quite as satisfying as 4. And the NHL goes, sure. So best of 7, they win 6-2, 4-3 in overtime, 5-4, and 4-2. It's Patrick Roy against Ranford and Keens plays in that series as well. So Ranford and Keens, it's not a good matchup. Patrick Roy takes him out for the 2nd year in a row. 1988, Boston realizing they need to make a change. They go in and they manage to knock off Montreal in round 2. So they meet in round 2 and Boston wins it in 5. They lose game 1, 5-2. It looks like maybe things are going to go the way they normally do, but Boston turns it around. Wins of 4-3, 3-1, 2-0, and 4-1. Reggie Lemelin and Eddie Moog both play in net in that series, and it's Brian Hayward and Patrick Roy. So Hayward ends up playing and Roy and so Moog ends up being a big part of a win. Although it's Lemelin and Moog split, but Moog is part of what turns things around. 1989, things don't quite turn around yet. Montreal, who have home ice again, they had home ice in 88 and lost. This is only the 2nd time the team with home ice advantage, had lost during this round. 1984, Boston's home ice didn't matter either. So 1988, it didn't matter for Montreal, but it matters in 1989 as they win in round 2 again, 4-1. They win 3-2, 3-2 in overtime. 5-4, they lose 3-2 in game 4, so they don't get the sweep, but they win game 5, 3-2. Patrick Roy and Brian Hayward split the net. Lemelin and Moog split the net at the other end of the rink, and Montreal moves on. They'd go to a Stanley Cup final that year. 1990, it's Boston's turn to go to the Stanley Cup final, and they have home ice in that 2nd round, I should say. They win game 1, 1-0. They win game 2, 5-4. They win 6-3, and they fail to get a sweep as Game 4 goes Montreal's way 4-1 before they win Game 5 3-1. Andy Moog wins that series over Watt, and Hayward plays in that series as well. So Andy Moog knocks off the Montreal Canadiens, and the legend begins. 1991, I should say. The next one. Next one is round 2 as well. This is a 7-game series. This one goes the full 7. 2-1 win for Boston. They lose game 2 in overtime 4-3. They do have home ice. They win Game 3 3-2. They lose Game 4 6-2. Game 5 they win 4-2. Game 6 they lose 3-2 in overtime, and then they win Game 7 2-1. Andy Moog at one end of the rink, Patrick Waugh at the other. And people wonder why I love Andy Moog. Moog was the one that turned the whole narrative around. 1992, the Boston Bruins don't have home ice, but they win the series in 4. They sweep the Montreal Canadiens for the first time since 1929. Notice there's 3 times that Montreal held Boston to 0 wins just on the board alone. Boston is not used to sweeping Montreal. They went 6-4, 3-2, 3-2, and 2-0. Andy Moog continues his ownership of Patrick Waugh. You would go 12-6 against Patrick Waugh in the playoffs. So while Patrick Waugh is, in my eyes, the best playoff goalie I've ever seen, Andy Moog didn't see what all the fuss was about. Really didn't. 1994, after Moog has moved on, Boston with home ice, they hold on and win this one in 7. They win 3-2 in Game 1, lose Game 2 3-2, win Game 3 6-3. Game 4 they lose 5-2. They lose Game 5 as well in overtime 2-1, and they win Game 6 and 7, 3-2 and 5-3 scores respectively. John Casey and Vince Rionda are the goaltenders for Boston against Patrick Waugh, and Ron Tugnut gets into a game as well. Tugnut loses that one game. I do believe that was the year of Patrick Waugh's appendicitis. So then these teams take a break. They've met every year from 1984 through 1994, missing 1993 only, where Montreal won a Stanley Cup. I don't know if that's related or not, but they didn't have to go through Boston. The other years, 90, 91, 92, and 94, Boston knocks them out. Pretty sure that's the longest run Boston's had of success against the Montreal Canadiens. They'd have to feel pretty good about that. They don't meet again until 2002. It's in round 1. Boston has home ice advantage. Doesn't matter. Without Andy Moog, the storyline changes. Montreal wins this one in 6. They win Game 1 5-2. They lose Game 2 6-4. They win 5-3, lose 5-2, and then they win Games 5 and 6, both of them by a 2-1 score. Jose Theodore outlasts Byron Dafoe in net for the Boston Bruins. So when you look at it, you can say, well, Boston wins their share. I would counter with, yeah, when Moog was in net. So 2004, Montreal doesn't have home ice. Doesn't matter. Boston's home ice. Doesn't matter. Game 1, they lose 3-0. They lose Game 2 2-1. So Boston wins both games at home to start the series. This guy's feeling pretty good after that overtime win in Game 2. But Montreal wins 3-2. They then lose 4-3 in double overtime. So Boston's up 3-1. Again, this guy's feeling pretty good. But Montreal rattles off wins of 5-1, 5-2, and 2-0. It's Jose Theodore outlasting Andrew Raycroft. So Raycroft goes through. Notice there's a lot more turnover in the Boston net than there is in Montreal. That's not a coincidence. 2008, so it's 4 years later. Montreal has home ice advantage, and they win this one in 7. So this is the 4th series that's gone to 7 between these two so far. 4-1 win, 3-2 win in overtime. They then go to Boston. They lose 2-1 in overtime. They win 1-0 to make it a 3-1 series. Boston fights back with wins of 5-1 and 5-4 before Montreal goes, yeah, no. And they win 5-0 in Game 7. And that ends that for Boston. It's Carey Price over Tim Thomas. Thomas remembers. A year later, again in round 1. These teams meet in round 1 a lot. Boston sweeps the Montreal Canadiens. This was a dominant series. I think Montreal had a lead in this series for like 5 minutes out of the total of 4 games. It was something ridiculous. 4-2, 5-1, 4-2, and 4-1. And best I've ever felt as a Bruins fan, to be honest. Tim Thomas over Carey Price and Jarro Halak, who both played in that series. And then in 2011, Boston, on their way to a Stanley Cup, they had home ice advantage. They win this one in 7. This was a tough series. They lose Game 1 2 nothing at home. They lose game 2, 3-1 at home. I'm not happy. Game 3, they win 4-2. Game 4, they win 5-4 in overtime. So on the road, they win both games. Then they come home, they win in double overtime 2-1 before going to Montreal, losing 2-1. And then they come home and win in overtime 4-3. At which point, a lot of screaming from me. Tim Thomas and Carey Price are the goaltenders, and Tim Thomas knocks off the Montreal Canadiens. Now, 2014, the last time these teams met, Boston had home ice advantage. Didn't matter. Montreal wins it in 7. It's a 4-3 victory for Montreal in double overtime in Game 1. They lose Game 2, 5-3. They win Game 3, 4-2. They lose Game 4 in overtime, 1-0. Game 5, they lose 4-2. So Boston had them on the brink, but Montreal wins 4-0 in Game 6, 3-1 in Game 7, and Carey Price knocks off Tuukka Rask. So, Carey Price knocks out Boston twice. Jose Theodore does it twice. Patrick Roy does it 3 times, and Steve Penny does it twice. In the Boston net, Andy Moog knocks off Patrick Roy and the Habs 3 times. Casey and Rionda combined to do it once, and Lemelin and Moog combined to do it another time, and Thomas twice. So Andy Moog is on teams that knock off the Montreal Canadiens 4 times in his time as a Boston goaltender, and that's all right here. So, and here. So, out of this period where Boston, you could say, well, they really dominated Montreal, I would counter with Andy Moog. And on some level, Cam Neely dominated the Montreal Canadiens. 9 times out of 16, Montreal's won this matchup since I started watching hockey. And so it is a matchup that is not great for Boston. If you look at those Moog's victories, this is why Andy Moog's a folk hero to Boston fans. Home ice advantage has mattered 10 out of 16 times. The team with home ice has won. Boston has won 5 out of 9. Montreal's won 5 out of 7. So if Montreal has home ice in the series between these teams, it's more important than it is for Boston. Boston's blown home ice advantage 4 times, including this is in 7, this is in 7. This one they actually lost it on the road, and then they lost both games at home in 1984. So home ice advantage against Montreal has been kind of a mixed bag if you're Boston. Boston is 7-6 against the Montreal Canadiens since 1987. That's where this guy jumped on the bandwagon when Cam Neely goes over to the Boston Bruins and became a Bruins fan. So the losses before that, they are what they are. And it's an interesting rivalry. These teams have met in Game 7 matchups 6 times. And 4 of the last 5 meetings, 5 of the last 7 meetings have gone to 7. A sweep. Boston's got a sweep in 2009 in between, but everything else went to 7. So this is a tough series either way. And as a fan of the Bruins, that's the reason I'm wearing the Bruins. And also because from the day that they wore this style of jersey and logo until now, where they brought this back with the Adidas on it, they've had their trials and tribulations against the Montreal Canadiens. I do look forward to seeing him in the playoffs again. It will happen again. It'll probably be in round 1. And if Boston has home ice, I'll probably be crossing my fingers the whole way. So there you go. First in a rivalry series, Montreal and Boston. Again, I will just look at the rivalries that are for the time that I've been watching hockey for now. And then as we get through this series, I will look at others as well. Thank you guys so much for all your support. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.